Hey, hey.
Hello. Happy Tuesday.
Oh, I know. It's like summer, it's sunny, everyone's in a good mood.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I am super excited about the conversation we're going to have today. We are talking about financial planning when you don't know what your goals are.
Yeah.
This is, I feel like, something that people don't talk about a whole heck of a lot. Just excited to kind of explore it a little bit more. So I am Danica Waddell. I'm the founder of Xena Financial Planning, and I'm joined by.
I am Mariana Llamas, and I'm the associate planner here at Xena Financial. I'm excited for this topic because I think if we talked about it more often, we would realize that not a lot of people do have like very concrete goals. And like, we're here to tell you that that is okay. That is totally normal. Because just think about it in your like daily life. Do you really know what you're going to be doing in 5-10 years, like with your life? That is very daunting. So like, how are you supposed to know like what your financial goals are? So hopefully today's conversation you'll be able to take some things away. And hopefully if you are worried about like, all my friends have like all of these big goals and I don't, like, what is up? And yeah, maybe we can provide some clarity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. There's kind of two pieces to this. It's like, how do I know what my goals are or should be? And then there's the other part of, okay, if you don't have any specific goals, is there any point to like financial planning? Can you still have, can you still have a financial plan without having set goals? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah.
One of the things that I would like to just take a step back and say that I really dislike the word goals. Like, it really rubs me the wrong way. So it's very, very common in our world in financial services to talk about goals, right? Because we are, it's a shorthand way of having a conversation with clients about what it is they want to achieve or what they're working towards or whatever. But goals to me feels very like, oh, you achieve this thing and then you're done. And like, and then what? Do you set new goals or are you then just done? It's a very like, I don't know. I feel like it's very binary. It's just sort of like you got it or you don't have it. Whether it's like, I want to buy $1 million house or something like that. I like to think about this in a much more dynamic way where there are things that we're working towards and they just change all the time. And we're always working towards something. But the actual word goals, I don't love. I haven't come up with a really great replacement, but I kind of like possibilities. Like, ooh, there's some things that we kind of like the idea of.
Yeah. And like that's what like financial planning is all about. Like it's never static. So you go and hire a financial planner, they create a financial plan for you, and then like you're done, you're good for years and years and years. Like that is never the case because life is always changing by like daily, monthly, yearly, and so on. So I think I read this somewhere today where they mentioned like goals is basically just a shorthand for saying, what do you want? What's important to you? Or what do you value most? Right. And those questions are so much more engaging than like, what are your goals? Like you mentioned, it's kind of like it's a goal mark and then you achieve it. And then like what happens next?
Right. And I think, so much of the work that we do with our clients is around values and what's important to people and things like that. And so it becomes less about like achieving a thing and having, a quality or an aspect of your life that you find satisfying that like might not be goal oriented, but it's like, hey, I want to have a job that gives me flexibility to have, dinner with my family every night. Like I don't want to be working super long hours, that sort of thing. That can be, I wouldn't necessarily call it a goal, but it is a value and it could definitely impact your finances and your financial plan.
Right. And then with that, we can plan to make that a possibility.
Yeah. I've heard somebody say something like, show me your checkbook and your calendar and I'll tell you what you really value. Right. So it's like, okay, where your money's going and where your time is spent is ultimately that's a shorthand version of getting some insight into where your time and money go.
Yeah, I guess that's a great point that you bring up. Like if someone is working with a professional or without like a financial planner and like they're kind of doing this on their own, where would you advise them to begin exploring like what's their why, what are their values, so that they can align their finances with what they want to do?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably easier for most people to come up with their values than it is for people to necessarily identify specific goals. So for instance, like we have an exercise that's free, like it's on a, website that we use, and we just tell people to kind of go through it. But people, they start out with 50 values, and then you have to narrow it down to pick your top 20 and then pick your top 10 and then go to 5. But I think probably many people could tell you what they value. Like some people will say, I value freedom, or I value security, or something like that. Lots of people can tell you what's important to them. In terms of goal setting, I actually think that it's okay to start really big when you're thinking about goals. And so let's just say you're single. So, we're removing the idea of having to do this with another person. But if you're single and you don't necessarily know what your goals are, I think it's okay to start really big. Like, hey, I'd like to, own a $1 million house on the beach. That might not be realistic at all in your financial situation, but there's something about that you want, right? Something about that is appealing to you. So I think it's okay to sort of dream big here when you're first starting out with the goal setting process, where you're like, yeah, I mean, if I could, wouldn't I want to live in a $1 million house by the beach? Yeah, that sounds amazing. And then from there, once you kind of brainstorm a whole bunch of things, like maybe you come up with a list of 10 or 20 things, then you can start to scale back and say like, okay, well, maybe the $1 million house on the beach is a little bit unrealistic, but maybe I can live near the beach, and maybe I can still, get some of the same things without actually living on the beach. So I think it's okay to start like really big and then bring it in, right? And so if you are doing this with a partner, be the same kind of thing, where you maybe just are throwing things out there, each of you, and just like, yeah, well, let's do this, and wouldn't it be cool if we could do that? And then start to say, okay, maybe all these things aren't realistic, or maybe some of them might not be compatible. Like, how do we start to sort through that and prioritize?
Right. Because essentially the whole exercise is what you're doing is like, what do you want your money to do for you? Right. Are you going to spend it all at once and live paycheck to paycheck? Most likely not. Right. So what do you want to do? And then once you have some ideas that you have generated, and like, again, like also these ideas might change over time, right? As time evolves, you might not even want to live by the beach, right? You might evolve like a hatred towards the beach or not. Who knows? But at least you have something that you are working towards, and that will kind of help you structure like what you have to do next.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So we talk a lot about, goals changing, life changing, things shift. You might have thought at some point that you wanted a house on the beach, and then, you develop an allergy to sand or something. I don't know. But things change all the time. So we modify as time goes on and as new information becomes available and all those things. So I think it's super important to have goals. I do think it's important to have goals, actually, even though I don't like the word, but to also know that they're going to change, and to be able to be flexible as situations, move you in one direction or another.
Mm-hmm. So now that, like, if someone sits down, they've kind of come up with a couple goals that they want to work towards, what would your advice be on like the next steps to save towards these items or these things?
Mm-hmm. Well, you probably need a financial planner so you can help prioritize, which is helpful, right? So it's like if you're saving for 3 or 4 or 10 goals, right? It's like, how do you do that? How do you think about that? And again, I think, sort of establishing what's the most important thing there, right? So for a lot of people, they might say like, yeah, I want to retire someday. I want to send my kids to college, and, maybe a few other things. But when it really comes down to it, well, yeah, I mean, if my kids have to take out loans, so be it. Like, I don't want to necessarily sacrifice my own retirement for paying for kids to go to college. So some people might start to say, well, yeah, if I really had to pick one or two of these might be the most important, right? And then, yeah, if I have extra money, sure, then I'll help the kids go to college. So some of it might be, when you really come down to it, are there two or three that are absolutely essential, like deal breakers? Like I'll work till I'm 99 if I have to pay for the kids for college? Or is it more like, no, that's more of a nice to have thing. So I think having some sense of like priorities, and, working with a financial, one of the reasons why that would be helpful is to identify, like, can you do everything, right? Like maybe you have 5 goals and the financial advisor is like, yeah, I can do all these things. Well, then it's easy.
But like, what if you don't have any of those like really concrete goals? Like, how do you structure that?
Yeah. This is a really good question. So, and this is kind of like the heart of the reason that we wanted to have this whole conversation was that, a lot of our clients, sort of the typical goals that a lot of people are working towards are like retirement, possibly paying for a kid to go to school, home ownership is often on there, or if you already have a home, it's buying a bigger house or remodeling or something. So these are like sort of very standard kind of goals. And if you work with someone like us, you might fill out a questionnaire that's like, list your, when do you want to retire and what size of house do you want to buy? So that might help you, but you might not have any of those. And with our clients, a lot of those things are decades away. Like, retirement, that might be 40 years away, 30 or 40 years, right? People that don't have kids, maybe don't plan to have kids, don't want to buy a house anytime soon, if ever. It's like, well, what else is there? So one of the things you and I talked about in regards to this conversation is really, instead of having specific goals, maybe having more of like these buckets of timeframes. Like, okay, I don't have any long-term goals, but I know I'm going to live for a while, probably. I'm going to be alive for these decades or whatever. I'm going to have a long-term goal bucket, a medium-term goal bucket, and a short-term goal bucket, and then sort of invest or not, depending on the time frame, without necessarily knowing exactly what that's going to look like.
But at least you're saving towards something, and then each of the buckets are invested differently based on the time frame that you will need them, and all of that is very important to consider when you are planning these out in like different buckets. I also like the idea of like the bucket like illustration. It's similar to like your life stages, right? So right now in like your 30s and your 40s and then your 50s, if you want to think about it like that, that is more less jargony than like your 3 different buckets, right? Because I know we use that with like retirement planning especially, but that's for another conversation. But yeah, I like that. I think that does create a little bit of structure in order to know like, where do I save to, and like what is the purpose where I'm saving to. And you don't need to have like a specific thing that you're working towards. You're just working towards at that time frame. In 10 years I will need money. I don't know what it's going to be for, but I know I'm going to have something there.
Right. So one thing that leaps to mind with so many of our clients who work in tech is, many of them say, I'm not going to be doing this forever. Like this is not sustainable. So I've maybe got 5 or 10 years left of this. They don't know yet what that looks like. That could mean maybe they start a business. Maybe they go back to school. Maybe they work in nonprofit. It could be anything. But to say, okay, this is my 10-year, I'm leaving tech fund. It's very, very undefined exactly what that means, but you've got something there. So when it comes time to enroll in school, start a business, do whatever it is that you think you want to do, now you've got this pot of money where it's like, okay, yeah, like I can afford to do that thing, rather than at that point saying, oh crap, like I need to get out tomorrow and I don't have that runway.
Right. It gives you a lot of flexibility. And we talk a lot about that in the sense of like what what money can do, and how powerful it is, because it does give you so many options. And if you are saving towards a different bucket for a specific scenario where anything could happen, and like you do have a bucket saved and you can dip into it whenever you want to, that could be life changing.
Yeah. 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 So I think for people that it doesn't mean, I think, a lot of people are probably in a scenario where they're like, I don't really know what I'm planning towards. Like, I'm just kind of in the moment, day by day, one day at a time sort of thing. And that, to a certain extent, I definitely think can be valid for a variety of reasons. I mean, we talk all the time about people not, staying in a job that they're miserable at or whatever. Like, we want people to have a life that they do love. That being said, one of the things that there's increasing research coming out about, the more that people are able to think into the future, the more successful they will be, right? So when we look at people, let's just say two identical people, and one of them is thinking about 5 years from now, and the other one's thinking about 5 hours from now, the person that's thinking about 5 years away, they're going to be more successful. They're going to have a better income. They're going to have, they're going to save more. And so I think as much as we can, it is important to kind of tune into some aspect of what we want in the future. If it's just all about, oh, I'm just, be here now, like, or YOLO or whatever, like whatever acronym you want to use, we lose that, right? So I think if you can connect to some sense of like, your future self. Actually, one example of this I have, this is a little bit of a tangent, but there are these apps now. Have you played with these apps that age you?
Oh, I have never seen the apps, but I know like the Snapchat filter.
Yeah. So there's the filters, apps, whatever. Yeah. So we were doing this recently with our kids, and you could basically like say, take your picture and then it'll turn you into like an 80-year-old or something. And I mean, that is actually a strategy, is to like be able to connect to and visualize yourself 30 years from now and be like, okay, what is 30 years from now me going to need? Like, again, nobody knows, right? I mean, literally nobody knows what 30 years from now is going to look like. But having any kind of connection and thinking, if you can just start to think, instead of days and hours, you can start to think weeks out or months out and then years. I do think that that is a positive inclination to sort of pull you in that direction. So even if you don't have specific goals and you don't know exactly what your life is going to look like in 5 years or 10 years, like we've already said, that's that's super normal. But anything you can do to relate to your future self, keep in mind what your future self might want. I think that's a positive attribute. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, because the more you think about it, the more you talk about like your future self, if that's like writing it down or whatever, even like using a filter that does age you, like it just becomes so realistic, right? As opposed to something that is going to happen in 20, 30 years. Like that is so hard to just think about. But like when you sit down and like are able to visualize it more and more, it does become more realistic. And right, like 20, 30 years, it's a long time frame, but there's a lot of room to be able to work towards achieving what you want your life to look like in 20, 30 years, if it's different than what you want it to look like now.
Yeah, it's all super abstract, right? It is really hard to visualize even 5 years out. But that's why I think the apps they're just kind of a fun, I mean, it's a little bit silly, but kind of a fun way to bring some reality to that, to that visual of what you might look like at some point in the future. And I think at the end of the day, like there's a tension, like so many things that we talk about, there's a tension between spending and saving. There's a tension between, what you want today and what you want in the future. And that's just part of being human. But I think this is the same idea of like being able to, love your life today, but also plan for the future, even when it's very undefined. And I think that it's important to have a little bit of both. So you don't want to only plan for the future and, live off of ramen today so that you can retire early or something. Like that's definitely not what we're recommending. But if you can have some, you're putting a little bit of your energy in both places, right? You're making sure that today is satisfying and meaningful, and you're also planning for the future, even though that future might be very undefined.
Yeah, the word that comes to mind is like balance, like trying to find the balance between the two. And I know even finding a balance in anything in your life is very challenging, and that is always evolving again. Like this is always evolving, and like the balance, if we had like like I guess, are they called a scale? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
a scale, like it's always going to be tipping a little bit like that, but we just don't want it to be dramatic one way. We just want it a little bit. We want it to sway back and forth a little bit, but nothing too drastic.
And you're just making all these little adjustments. My friend Brian talks about the difference between being and becoming, right? Which is kind of the same idea. Like being is sort of, being in the moment and all that versus what are you becoming? What are you planning for? What's happening down the line? So I think we do need to keep an eye on both of those things, which is complex and also makes it really fun for us, right? It's like a juggling act that is when we figure it out, it's really satisfying.
It does. Yeah. And I guess like to wrap all of this up, like again, we're financial planners and we help people with this every day. When would you advise someone to seek professional help?
That's a really good question. I would say, if you're 22 and you're like, oh, I wonder what my goals are, and, you're just getting started, you probably don't need to work with a professional just yet. But usually when we start to see people is like, things have just gotten a little bit too complex. And like, there's a whole lot of tax stuff going on that I don't understand. And I want to make sure I'm not making mistakes or a lot of times, actually, this is what we hear from people a lot. I've gotten to the point where like, I'm making a decent amount of money and I want to actually be intentional about where things are going and what my future looks like. So oftentimes it'll happen when people kind of have, they reach some sort of point in terms of income where it's like, okay, it's time to be a grown up about this and make some actual plans, I guess.
Right. We see that a lot with, we work with people in tech, and it's like the first thing when they come to us, a lot of times it's like, I have so many types of equity compensation and I don't understand any of it. And I've just let it kind of float in the background. And now like, I need to actually understand this stuff. Yeah. So that would be like also the triggering point to seek a financial planner.
Or if you just want to know what your goals are and you want somebody to help you, navigating that conversation is also something that we do, which I think can be a lot of fun. We often also work with newlyweds or people that are just, getting started, just getting serious in their relationship. And they're like, okay, we want to sort of, make plans together, but like, how do we do that?
Yep. Having that conversation together. And then especially when you bring in someone that is unbiased and not part of that relationship can also help facilitate a better conversation than if you guys were just doing it by yourselves.
Hopefully.
Yeah, that's the goal.
We try.
All right. Anything else before we wrap up?
No, I guess just sort of reiterating that even if you don't have any specific goals, that doesn't mean that it's not important to think about the future. And there's still lots of things you can do where it's, can just be as simple as short, medium, long term, even thinking about investment strategy. Like there's still lots of things that you can do, even if you're not like, yes, I want to buy a house and yes, I want to send my kids to college. Like, so it can be a little bit more confusing, I guess, when you don't have those specific things. But I think there's still plenty to be done and lots of good potential work when you work with us or do it on your own.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say, and we didn't really talk about like the challenges of investing or like even saving when you don't have any goals. I think the biggest pitfall that you would run into is kind of throwing everything at the wall. Kind of if you think about like a pasta and you just like throw the pasta on the wall and see if it sticks. Like you don't want that. Therefore, like you want to just really be intentional, even if you don't have, again, like very concrete goals that you are saving towards. Just like be a little bit intentional and don't invest and save in like 100 different areas and different accounts, because that is not going to help you in the long run.
Or put it all on your mattress.
Yeah.
So probably not a wise idea. Yeah. But better than nothing. Better than spending it all. All right, we could keep going, but I think it's a good place to wrap. That was a fun conversation. We do these every 2 weeks. If you have anything specific you want us to cover, let us know. We're totally happy to, adapt to whatever is interesting to our audience. And this is not specific tax or investment advice, so please, this is for educational purposes only, and you should consult with your own financial advisor if you have one.
Yes. Awesome. I will see you in 2 weeks.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.